Welcome back to the Black River. When we last paddled together, we were camping under the beautiful stars and black willow boughs 26 miles downstream from King Street. We were starting to find stretches of deep water, maybe only 5 or 6 feet deep, where we could actually paddle and finally start to make up lost time. But before we get too far along in our journey, I want to touch upon what is this Black River paddle all about. It's about making an impact by inspiring the good stewardship of our waters and our lands. It's about bringing these experiences to you in hopes of fostering a greater respect. We have a long and deep connection to our wild places. They fill us with a deep wonder, a curiosity. We have paddled down this river, camping along its sandy banks to experience this place of memories, to learn from and to understand our river so that we can protect what might be lost, not only within our wild places, but also within ourselves, within our youth and our future. So paddle along with us and get to know our Black River.
Paddle down to your boat, don't give you your mic and your cell phone back.
Yep, I will jog through, but adorable puppy shot is a must. Falcor, hey puppy. All right, you ready? You ready to get in the boat? I hope you went potty. This is a spectacular spot. Falcor, let's go. Come on. So the water comes through here when the tide's higher, but this little island, these little patches of islands stay dry. So you can imagine coming out here, putting in your kayak, paddling just a half mile downriver, coming through these shallow spots. The water will be probably up around my chest level, and then picnicking among these amazing little islands. Falcor, let's go. Come on. Hey, Falcor, come on, come on.
Tell me again about this timber tract up here, and good examples of timber and bad examples of timber.
Well, if you look on the left here, this landowner obviously wanted to harvest some timber a couple of years ago. Large tract of timber, but look at what they've done. They've given us a buffer. There's a good 100, maybe even 125 foot buffer there that protects the riparian border of the river. They're able to still get the value of their land, the value of their timber off the land, but at the same time they're protecting the integrity of the river, the aesthetics of the river. They're also preserving that bank, because we know that if they cut within one tree of the bank, those other trees are going to wash out, and then that bank is going to be compromised on top of that. So that landowner did a great job for himself as well as for those of us who are trying to preserve the river. This is what we hope for, is that if they're going to cut timber, they're going to do it in a very ethical way, and as well as the timber crews. Because a lot of times, you know, those timber crews are working out of sight of the public, but you hope that they're ethical enough and that that timber contractor has told them, here's your border, these are the guidelines. Don't cut any closer to the river, even though there may be the most beautiful tree on the whole track. So, you know, we're counting on them, but at the same time, you have to have a balance with all of this. There has to be some protection for the landowners who want to cut their timber. It can't just be for the people that say, I love the beauty of the river and they should never cut their timber. It's their timber, it's their land, and it just happens to border the river. But if everybody will find a balance, an equality, this can work for everybody. This is what you hope for.
As we approached Irving Landing, thoroughly weary and already a day behind schedule, we were spiritually exhilarated. This was the drop-off point where Dr. Louis Drucker, who after 3 days on the river was finally expected to return home and see his wife. I'd like to thank Louis for all of his help and his hard work guiding us down this wild and scenic river. He is a true river rat and a dedicated river advocate. His spirit is so in tune with this place, and even after a lifetime of paddling, he still finds wonder and curiosity around each bend.
Who knows? This might go viral. All of a sudden, we might all have a Discovery Channel show.
Those that wouldn't, those that couldn't, those that shouldn't have.
This is-
amigos.
Along with individuals like Louis Drucker who care for our river, many partners are involved in the conservation of this scenic and wild place. They include the town of Kingstree, Williamsburg County, Georgetown County, the Black River Cypress Preserve, the Bunnell Foundation, Earth Design, the Open Space Institute, the Winyah Rivers Alliance, the Nature Conservancy, and the South Carolina State Parks Program. This past summer, Tim and I joined with representatives from these partnerships to tour some of the new access points that will allow for increased accessibility to these wonderful sections of river. We met with Dr. Richard Porcher from the Citadel and Dr. Mariah Whitehead from the Open Space Institute at the Hines Canada Track to get a thorough introduction to this exciting new site. We look forward to having campsites, walking trails, kayak launches, and educational spaces that can be enjoyed by the young and old alike, by those from both near and far.
This is the Blackwater River. There's two kinds of rivers in the state, brown water, black water. So, what a Blackwater River generally originates in the coastal plain area. So it doesn't have that tremendous amount of silt, but it does have a lot of organic material, tannin and everything as you see out here. So it's what we call a Blackwater River. So Blackwater and brown water rivers, the two major rivers. The Savannah River is a brown water. The Edistone's a black water. This is a black water. It originates in the state in the coastal plain area. The king organic matter, the tannin, and so forth in the trees that gives it the color. In fact, you get a good clean river, you can drink it like tea. I'm serious. You can drink that water.
I've noticed when you put your hand in, you can see it just as clear
Right.
as day.
There's no silt in it.
Right.
This thing like tannin, but when you drink tea, you drink it tannin to some degree.
Yep.
I've taken my cadet many a time. Where's the did we drink the water? I can't remember.
Well, we did, but you did.
The opportunity here for a lesson for students and people to see what we can do with the tract of land. As far as I'm concerned, that's been abused, but take it and restore it to something that was here before and be able to walk down from a long-leaf pine forest with orchids and things and then down into a bottomland hardwood forest. If you want to be in paradise, you're in as close to paradise as you'll ever get. Blackwater River, bottomland and hardwood swamp, cypress trees, every kind of wildlife you can think of. So I admire what y'all are doing. I can't tell you how much we appreciate what y'all are doing with State Park, trying to protect this land.
All these hardwood forests, you know, they act like sponges when we have our floods. And so the 2015 flood and some of our other floods where we have mature hardwood forests, they're just soaking in those floodwaters. And so actually helping to protect our communities and homes by holding, we would say, sequestering those floodwaters.
By conserving these parcels, vast, wild, and ecologically vital environments will be protected from the threat of overdevelopment that has been creeping up our waterways for decades. By increasing access, we secure these places for the environmental, educational, recreational, and cultural values that they will provide.
Day 3 of the Black River Paddle. By now we've probably gone, 25, 26 miles, maybe a little more. But we have seen all sorts of beautiful things. Experienced mist on the water, 40 degrees in the morning, hot, sunny, beautiful afternoons, historic bridges, caves where refugees hid out. We've seen wildlife. We've been doing a lot of walking, a lot of pulling, a lot of lugging kayaks over fallen trees. It has truly been an adventure here on the upper reaches of the Black River. It's perfect, it's silent, it's a wonderful place to be. So, right here is a point in the river which can be very tricky, right? The river splits up into little offshoots, little creeks, little swamps, and this is a part where, if you look around me, it looks like the river continues down that way, right? I mean, it's wide, it goes straight, and then back this way, we've got just a little narrow, windy curve, and that's the way we came from. Now, had we gone that way, we would have gone for about a half mile and then ended up in dense, thick swamp. That's the way we've got to go, right? That is the river, and that is the swamp. However, that is about twice as wide, and it's straight. And so again, if you're out here, if you don't have a map, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't check the GPS, you can get very lost out here. It's very easy to get turned around in a creek in a swamp and have no clue, how do I get back to the river? The water moves very, very slowly at this part of the river, so you can get up there and literally just have no clue, you know, which way the tide's going. So, a tricky place in the river right here. So these are stone shelves. And if you look closely, this is actually a sediment layer that was once the bottom of the ocean. And all of these little brown bits, all up in here, these are old fossilized seashells, or old seashells that are in the process of becoming fossilized. And so this was the bottom of the ocean. This was a seashell layer, and we're about 8 feet under the ground level. So usually this is covered with water, but because of the tides, the water level's so low right now, we get to see this shelf. But this is all the limestone, sandstone seashell beds, and that's an old fossilized shell right there. And you can see where bits are breaking off. Right there's one that's the sun's not good, but there's a fossilized shell. So pretty cool how when the water level's low, you get to see these different layers of sediment, layers of the soil. We go from topsoil to sand into this sandy fossil bedrock.
In seeing these ancient layers of sediment and rock, I can't help but to think back upon the natural history of this river, its wildlife, and the peoples that have inhabited it for millennia. First, let's go way, way back. I've mentioned that at one point in time, millions of years ago, the Appalachian Mountains were giant, jagged peaks, and the fingers of those mountains would have stretched down to this coast and met the sea. At another point in this river's distant past, this place was completely submerged, and the bottom of the sea floor was right here. Even today, you can still see the sedimentary layers of fossilized seashells along this river. During the last ice age, when glaciers covered almost 1/3 of the Earth's mass, sea levels were drastically lower, and our coastline stretched out hundreds of miles farther than its position today. Since that time, as the ocean levels have risen back, the Black River has been carving its way through sandstone, creating vast swamps and hundreds of sandbars along its way out to the sea. This was a time before man's imprint upon this river, and there would have been an amazing array of megaflora and fauna, only some of which are still around today. If you could have paddled down this river in those times, you would have seen mammoth and mastodons swimming in the water, pulling up plants from the bottom or branches from willow trees to eat. Imagine the trumpeting of these woolly elephants as their young splashed and played in the sandy shallows. Giant beaver, the size of grizzly bears, would have been another common sight along this river, as well as the American lions and saber-toothed cats that would be perching along its banks, ready to pounce on their plus-sized prey. Giant ground sloths, the size of modern-day elephants, would have made their way through pine savannas, eating cones and foliage or other plants that they come upon. The canopies of these pine savannas and cypress tupelo swamps would have been alive with the chittering of thousands of Carolina parakeets, and the hammering of the ivory-billed woodpecker would have been heard all up and down this river. When the first peoples arrived to these lands that we now call Carolina and Black River, they would have had an incredible abundance of wildlife to hunt and fish for, and also plenty of natural resources like timber and chert to produce tools with. The latest archaeological and anthropological findings are now painting a new picture of the human habitation of the Americas. We are now sure that humans have been a part of this world far beyond the last ice age and the Bering Strait land bridge crossing. A handful of sites have popped up, one being the Topper site in South Carolina along the Savannah River, that are revealing stone tools and artifacts that are at least 50,000 years old. These findings are a triumph for all people, as this gives a greater merit to our human ancestors that first explored the world so long ago. It is likely that in a time when sea levels were far lower, island chains would have stretched across both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, allowing prehistoric people from Africa and Asia to island hop in crude dugouts or sailing craft all the way to the Americas. These first people of this land would have fit the bill for our traditional hunter-gatherer culture. We call this the PreClovis and Clovis culture, who were known for their high craftsmanship quality of their stone axes, chert spear points, shell jewelry, and clay pottery. 50,000 years ago, they would have lived in semi-nomadic bands, keeping permanent camps at important sites along rivers, such as quarries or near significant food sources. However, as the seasons changed, they would migrate between inland rivers and coastal marshes, taking advantage of abundant natural food sources like fish, shellfish, fruits, nuts, grains, mushrooms, turtles, alligators, frogs, birds, and both large and small mammals. They hunted in small parties with atlatls and later bows, along with various trapping methods. They also would have gathered and even cultivated plots of regional plants like hickory nuts, muscadine grapes, berries, persimmon, maize, beans, and squash. With access to both land, the river, and the coast, early peoples along this river would have thrived and developed a culture far more sophisticated than what we give them credit for today. For literally tens of thousands of years, these people would have inhabited this coastal region, living and dying by the land, and eventually forming into the cultural groups that later met the first European colonizers. In the early 1500s, the first wave of Spanish explorers began to sail up the Carolina coast, and an early Spanish settlement named San Miguel de Guadalupe was founded in 1526 in the Wiña Bay. This settlement was quickly abandoned as the Spanish were ill-equipped to handle a Carolina swamp during the summer season. With this first wave of Europeans came the great plagues of disease that would have swept through native communities across the continent and decimated many of the peoples and cultures of the Carolinas, many of whom would have never even known the existence of these European invaders. It was about 200 years later, in the early 1700s, when explorers like John Lawson or Mark Catesby made their voyages through this region, documenting the flora and the fauna, as well as the indigenous people that they came across. While Lawson and Catesby's writings are crucial to understanding our indigenous peoples of the Carolinas, it is very important to note that these peoples, the Chicora, Santee, Wiña, Siwi, Witi, Pidi, Catawba, Edisto, and Yamasee, would have only been a small remnant population of the descendants of the great undiscovered nations that were wiped out by the first European plagues in the 1500s. Although we don't have any great stone structures left behind, large Indian mounds, leveled fields, and numerous shell middens still can be found in this region today. According to the accounts of Lawson and Catesby, written down a mere 300 years ago, many of the wild creatures that are gone today were still here then. At the time, giant millennial cypress trees would have filled these swamps, and they would have been full of the Carolina parakeets, ivory-billed woodpeckers, and passenger pigeons. Lions and tigers were said to have prowled these cypress swamps as well. However, it is likely that these big cats were the eastern cougar and jaguars that had migrated from the west. Large herbivores, such as elk and bison, were also still found in the Carolinas while the Europeans were beginning to map out this coastline. However, this would not last. As Europeans settled the Carolinas, moving up the Black River to found Kingstree in 1732, many of these great animals, from the bison to red wolves and Carolina parakeets, were hunted either to extinction or until they no longer existed in the Carolinas. When we are trying to understand the deep history of this place, we must take our lessons from the bits and pieces of knowledge that has been left behind for us. The indigenous peoples of Black River were much more in tune with nature than we are today, and the biodiversity of this river was far, far greater before European arrival. The peoples here would have lived in such a sustainable way that they would have left very little trace upon this river. And it wasn't until the Europeans found this River of Eden that we began to see the vast impacts and destructive changes to this wonderful environment. We might not ever know the true stories of the first peoples that lived along Black River, but we can examine what we do know. We can try to find connections with our past to our present on this river, and hopefully it will lead to more fulfilling and sustainable lives for ourselves, but also future generations. This is a fascinating and wild river, and although we no longer see mammoth or black panthers along its banks, there is still an incredible biodiversity to this place today. These waters, although tinted brown, are also clean and clear. Many tiny creatures swim these waters or even dance along its surface. These swirling pockets of water beetles are so mesmerizing. Tiny larvae hunt for even tinier prey, like this caddisfly nymph. Other nymphs emerge from these waters, clinging to cypress knees to transform into my favorite insect of all time, the dragonfly. These June beetles seem to be enjoying themselves. This horse lubber grasshopper is the largest grasshopper species found in the Carolinas. And can you guess what our state insect is? The Carolina praying mantis. These fascinating mantids practice sexual cannibalism, where the larger female often catches and eats the male after reproduction. At nighttime, the serenades of katydids and crickets sound throughout the swamps. I guess this common house spider is not a fan of that music. This large golden silk orb weaver is also enjoying her meal, as a diminutive male waits for his opportunity behind her. Like the mantis, he better be careful that he doesn't end up on his spouse's plate. Typically, you would imagine seeing dung beetles on the African savanna, but a few species, such as this humpback dung beetle, can be found along Black River. Of course, as we paddled down the river, we saw plenty of bees enjoying the many flowering plants, as well as many large hornet nests, which we steered far away from. As we dip back below the surface, we find an underwater world alive with small minnows and fish. This river has a wide diversity of fish species. This long-nosed gar was unafraid of my presence, and in fact, he seemed curious as he approached and nudged my kayak. Bluegill, crappie, bass, and sunfish are also common targets for fishermen as they float down Black River. On our third night on this river, we caught and released 2 blue catfish. These fish will eat almost anything and can grow up to 5 feet in length. Another river creature that sometimes finds itself on a local's plate is the American bullfrog. I can attest that fresh frog legs are a native delicacy, that the people on the Black River have enjoyed this for thousands of years. They taste like something between chicken and fish. Yellow-bellied sliders were one of my favorite river creatures to try and catch growing up here. They were a common food source for early peoples, and cooter stew is still something that can be found on rural menus. I wasn't quite sure if these two were in their mating dance or if they were fighting over a mate. Aside from turtles, the most common animal that we saw on our paddle was the brown water snake. Although we paddled downriver during late fall, on each sunny day these non-venomous serpents could be seen all along the river, basking in the rays. Another much larger snake that we happened upon was this beautiful yellow rat snake. They live out here in the swamps, in the forests. These snakes can climb just about any vertical surface, any tree out here. And like the name suggests, they feed off of rats and small rodents. Look at him sitting there, tasting the air. He does not care that we are right here underneath him at all. These are very docile snakes. They are not aggressive species. I could probably try to pick this guy up and handle him, but I'm not going to do so. I'm going to leave him be, leave him alone. He actually gave me quite a scare when he came across the water. He came right past my kayak, and I had to swipe at him with the paddle just because at the first glance I didn't quite know what he was. Beautiful creature. They're an important part of the ecology out here. They're an important predator. They also could be prey. Ospreys or eagles have been known to capture snakes and feed on them just like this one here. But he is so gorgeous. Notice as he kind of slides through the limbs, his body can contort, wrap around different branches. They have a very distinctive yellow-orange coloring. They have 4 horizontal stripes that go down the length of their body, so they're easy to identify, and they are non-venomous. So anytime you see one of these yellow-striped yellow rat snakes, do not kill it, do not worry. They mean you no harm. They're actually going to take care of the rodents, they're going to take care of the pests, and they are a safe snake to enjoy. The yellow rat snake. There is another large reptile that calls this river home, an ancient creature that was swimming these waters even during the time of the great mammoths and before that, dinosaurs, the American alligator. Being the largest reptile in North America, alligators can grow up to 16 feet in length and live up to 100 years in the wild. They are ambush predators, feeding upon fish, turtles, birds, or even small and large mammals unfortunate enough to find themselves too close to the water. Despite the fact that alligators can indeed kill and eat an adult human, and that they are found in these waters year-round, I don't have much of a fear of them. Growing up upon our coastal rivers means growing up with alligators. Unless it's a female protecting her nest of eggs, the age-old adage is true. They are more afraid of you. Despite being the apex predator of this river, the alligator is not invulnerable. Alligator hunting has been an age-old sport along Black River, and each year, more and more of the largest and oldest gators are shot and taken from our waters. I hope that I never see the day when the last of the 13 and 14-foot giants are gone from this river. Black River attracts a great many species of birds, such as songbirds, swallowtail kites, woodpeckers, osprey, wading birds, waterfowl, and eagles. Migratory waterfowl have long played a special role on Black River, as duck hunting for survival and later recreation is a time-honored tradition here. Duck hunters purchase the duck stamp prior to hunting, which is one of the great sources of funding that helps to protect and preserve wetlands all across our nation. Waterfowl hunting was not always limited to game birds, though. During the early days of European colonization, herons and snowy egrets were prized for their beautiful feathers. The demand for feathers to decorate hats and clothing of the rich aristocracy almost drove some of our beloved wading birds to extinction. And in the late 1800s, in fact, the great egret population declined so much that possibly only a single rookery site along the Santee River is responsible for their survival and bounce back. Great blue herons are another beautiful wading bird commonly seen along Black River. They stand about 4 feet tall and can have a 6.5-foot wingspan. As we paddled down the river, we would often startle a heron hunting along the bank. It would leap into flight and go downstream, and in a short while, we'd catch back up again and startle it into flight once more. Aside from the great blue herons and the great egrets, we saw tricolored herons, night herons, and even a green heron sitting upon her nest with a young chick. The Anhinga, or sometimes called snakebird or snakeneck, is a common diving bird found all along the river. These birds dive deep underwater to catch small fish and prey with a very sharp beak. Unlike many other diving birds, the Anhinga does not have water-repellent feathers. When it dives, its dense bones and wetted feathers allow it to have a neutral buoyancy, so it can remain fully submerged and hunt for longer underwater. When they emerge from the water, they can often be seen picking through their damp feathers and basking in the suns with wings spread wide, drying themselves out. This is the barred owl, a common and curious raptor that preys on small rodents as it silently glides through the pine forest. These birds are notable for their "who cooks for you" calls that can be heard echoing through these cypress swamps at dusk. Experienced naturalists can call these ghostly birds and often get a hoot or a cackle in return. Another larger owl found on the Black River is the great horned owl. Don't let this adorable down-covered chick fool you. It will grow up to become a fierce bird of prey. I can remember as a young boy looking across the river at sunset and seeing a silhouette of a great horned owl perched in a tall pine. If the hoots and cackles of owls is my favorite bird song, the chittering of grackles and songs of red-winged blackbirds are a close second. These birds form into large flocks as they feed on cones in the pine canopy. The dozens of cries and calls will echo through the trees, a beautiful cacophony, and then suddenly, as one, it will cease. You'll hear the whoosh of hundreds of wings as the entire flock takes into flight and heads off to find another group of trees to feed on. The search for wildlife gets a bit more difficult when we try to turn our attention to our native mammals. So first, we'll take a look at our common rodent, the gray squirrel. These small rodents feed on nuts, berries, acorns, and even small invertebrates and amphibians, reptiles, or birds. Raccoons are also frequently seen hunting and gathering along the riverbed, or sneaking into campsites after dark. Beaver signs are very common while paddling down the river, but spotting the elusive animal itself is a bit more tricky. Our patience and attention would pay off as we spotted this guy hanging out near Mingo Creek. Beavers are dam and nest builders. They will strip small trees, carry them off to a site to build whatever structure they want to build. And along our voyage, we were able to pick up a few pieces of this expertly carved beaver wood as souvenirs to take home. As the beaver is the largest North American rodent, the river otter is the largest member of the weasel family. Otter populations thrive in habitats such as this Black River. They feed upon any aquatic organism that they can catch, such as mollusks, crayfish, fish, amphibians, turtles, snakes, and even any small birds or mammals that they can catch. River otters used to be found all across North America, but these shy creatures are especially vulnerable to the impacts of environmental pollution and habitat loss. Despite a declining national population, river otters seem to be doing very well here on Black River, due to the untouched nature of this place. Larger mammals can also be found in the forested lands and swamps surrounding Black River. Invasive wild hogs, whose ancestors escaped from European settlers, have become a force of destruction in South Carolina. These large and dangerous animals dig up and consume anything that they can find and cause vast damage to both pristine habitats and cultivated farmland alike. Hogs are hunted like the native white-tailed deer, but even these efforts to curb their numbers aren't seeming to work. The white-tailed deer is probably the hunter's most prized prey along Black River. These ruminants are the last of the large hoofed grazing animals seen in this part of the world. Due to practical management and hunting laws, their populations have been steady, and in 2021, the South Carolina whitetail population was estimated to be around 730,000 deer. This shows that an ethical and sustainable hunting culture along this river is strong, and that the sales of ammunition, licenses, and tags have gone a long way towards preserving deer habitats and keeping population numbers high. Before European settlement, whitetails had to contend with red wolves and eastern cougar predation, but today their natural predators are far more limited. Gray foxes are small and elusive canids native to South Carolina. Smaller than their non-native cousins, the red fox, they are tree dwellers, feeding on rodents, insects, amphibians, reptiles, and any small creatures it can catch. A larger canine is now found along the Black River, the coyote. It is not exactly known what brought coyotes into the Carolinas, but likely they migrated eastward as deer populations rose after the decline of red wolves and eastern cougars. Over the course of its history, Black River has been home to American lions, Smilodon, eastern cougar, and the famous black panther. But today only one wild feline remains, the red lynx, or as we call it, the bobcat. These are one of the most elusive animals here, but on occasion you will find an unfortunate bobcat lying by a rural roadside. One afternoon, my dad brought home one such carcass, and its terrifying scowl would occupy a prime spot in the freezer for a decade or more, and was the subject for many oohs and ahs during sleepovers or visits. And finally, Ursus americanus, the American black bear. This magnificent beast is our largest native land mammal left, and despite their wide range across this continent, they are an absolute treasure of this river. Black bears will eat almost anything edible and can grow up to 600 pounds and stand over 7 feet tall. Although while provoked they are the most dangerous animal out here, black bear attacks are almost unheard of on Black River. In fact, they were once prized as a valuable food source, as a large black bear could feed a family throughout the entire winter, and their fat content would render down into valuable bear grease. As we paddled down this section of river, we saw a couple of young men heading out, testing out a new boat they just got. A little while later, we were surprised when we heard the crashing of this Labrador retriever coming down the riverside and swimming across. At first, when I saw it, my heart jumped as I thought, oh my gosh, here's an eastern cougar. But we quickly realized, nope, it's just a dog chasing his masters downstream. When experiencing this habitat of such biodiversity, with flora and fauna that remind us of times and lands long forgotten, one organism stands out along the Black River. Taxodium distichum, the Bald Cypress. In rare virgin stands, pockets of isolated trees that missed the axe and the saw blade, exist ancient, monolithic trees whose germination date could go back into the BCs. Dendrochronology, the dating of growth lines in large trees, is one of the most accurate methods of scientific dating. and new core sample data of similar-sized cypress trees in the Three Sisters Swamp of North Carolina is resulting in some astounding news. Some of these great trees are over 2,000 years old, making them by far the oldest living organisms on the eastern coast of North America. These trees bring up a very serious question. How is it possible that in this flooding landscape, in which devastating hurricanes make landfall, how could these trees survive so long? How could this elder that I have laid my hand upon have existed in the times of Christ? Well, it's their amazing adaptations and the connectedness of the natural world that they represent. Let me explain. Cypress trees form a root network, a web of roots that spread horizontally through the mud and then grow upwards, forming these cypress knees. These knees, which are the roots of ancient trees, can grow to be over 6 feet tall, and they interlock and merge underground with the roots of other cypress trees and even tupelos in this swamp. This forms a growing grid of roots that will stretch unbroken through the entire landscape. Like interlocking hands underground, these roots provide a network that supports this place. Many underwater creatures like otters, alligators, or catfish will make their homes in and among the submerged roots of these trees. This underground network acts like an anchor, and it will hold the soil together, preventing erosion during the worst floods. It will also lock this forest in place when the hurricane winds tear up the coast. The trunks of these great trees are also adapted in a way that is called hydromorphic buttressing, creating wide and dense bases, allowing these trees to grow tall and strong in the soft mud. Taxodium distichum has a symbiotic relationship with many organisms in this ecosystem, interconnecting with other plants and fungi, but also with birds and mammals. Woodpeckers will burrow into these great trees and hollow out vast spaces within them. Amazingly, this does not kill the cypress. In fact, many of the oldest grand cypress trees still living are hollow all the way through. This creates invaluable nesting spaces for many birds like owls and the prothonotary warbler. Also, it creates homes for mammals like raccoons, foxes, and squirrels. These places are so important during the storm season, as if a hurricane comes through the river, animals can hide within these caverns and be safe. In the tall canopy, you can find great nests of impressive birds, like the great blue heron, the osprey, or the bald eagle. Their seeds were also the primary food source for the now extinct Carolina parakeet, and they are an important seed for many birds and rodents on the Black River today. These trees are truly what create and define this environment. By protecting the forest from winds and erosions, by providing food and shelter for the many creatures from water to sky, and by witnessing, capturing the history of this place, which we can read in their inner rings. It is so important that this river be protected in perpetuity, because if we lose our rare and ancient cypress trees, we not only lose the oldest children of this land, but in fact, this entire ecosystem would fade and be swept downstream with the sand.
So tell me about coming out here to the Black River. What were your thoughts when you were, before we got out here? What were you thinking? And then now that you've been out here, tell me about the impressions that the Black River has left upon you.
Well, growing up in central North Carolina, I've paddled down some rivers in the past, And when you mention the Black River, you know, it's just another river I'm going to paddle down. But when I came out here a couple of days ago for the first time, there's something really unique about the beauty of this place. Between the cypress swamps, the wildlife, the color of the river itself. Marsh just gave me a lesson on why this river is called the Black River and why it is the color. This area is certainly unique. Well, paddling through the Black River, it just feels old. When you paddle through these swamps and these tight canals, it feels very primal and primitive, just based off the scenery alone. And back behind me, I'm not sure if you can see, there's a very old cypress tree. I can't tell you the exact year or age on it, but certainly beautiful. Marsh told me about this tree numerous times since I started working with him, and to see it in person, it's certainly a bucket list experience, in my opinion.
Now to hear the news that in a few years you'll be able to easily access spots like this. There will be campgrounds nearby where you can bring your kayaks for the weekend. You can camp out, you can slide right into the water, you can paddle 10 miles and then pull on up to another campground and make your way from these swamps all the way out to the ocean. How does that sound?
It sounds great. I think it's significant to be able to come to places like this. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been intrigued by nature and just the solitude you can get in places like this. I think it's especially with kids nowadays, and me growing up as well, we're attracted to electronics, TV, your phones and stuff like that. So to come out here, I think it's important to get in touch with the earth itself, and being out here in places like this, it's a very humbling experience, and I feel like these experiences are rare to find nowadays with just the construction and the development that you see everywhere you go in this country. So to have this place protected, it's very, very important. Yeah.
If you enjoyed the Black River Paddle, the third voyage, give us a follow on our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. That's MLNL Media, Marsh Dean, and Tim Bean. Please comment on, like, and share our videos with your friends. Your support makes a huge difference in creating this series. If you'd like to help support the Black River, check out the Winyah Rivers Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the 5 great rivers that flow into the Winyah Bay. Also, stay tuned for the next episode of the Black River Paddle as we make our way past Andrews and some of the Black River's most scenic historic locations. The river will widen out and we pass old plantations and paddle underneath bridges, looking deeper at this river's post-colonial history.